Good afternoon. I'm Paul Hender, Head of Insight for Cision in EMEA. In today's webinar, we'll be looking into measuring our maturity, which you asked my wife, she would say is very low. More specifically, we'll be looking at measuring the maturity of our communications, which my wife would also say is very low. Luckily, we have two significantly more mature guests than me to help this afternoon, both with bags of industry experience. Colin Wheeler is Managing Director of Survey Solutions, a consultancy helping clients how to understand and engage with their customers and employees. Previously, Colin provided freelance consultancy using 20 years of experience in agency and client-side roles in research and insight as Consultant Director of Understanding Expertise and an associate at the measurement practice. Colin has been a member of the International Board for AMEC since 2014 and is a member of the Market Research Society. At WE Communications, he set up and ran the EMEA Insight and Analytics team, and during 9 years at British Airways, specialised in global brand communications and reputation research. He has served on the panel of judges for both the International AMEC Awards, the ICO Global Awards, and PR Moment Awards in the UK. Hi, Colin.
Yes, so I'm quite old then.
We also have Ben Levine, who joined Fishburne earlier this year as Director of Research of Analytics and Measurement, taking up leadership of the London team. Ben works with clients such as Samsung, Tata Consultancy Services, Bayer, NVIDIA, and Merck, helping them with development and implementation of multi-channel evaluation programs, primary research products, focusing on brand performance, consumer insight and reputation, and transforming multiple data source outputs into relevant and actionable insights. Previously, Ben was Vice President for Global Analytics at Ketchum, where he worked for more than 10 years supporting clients such as Philips, MasterCard, Pfizer, Booking.com, and IATA, both in New York and London. In addition, Ben is an active thought leader and contributor and has spoken about research and evaluation at many industry conferences from London to Amsterdam, Lisbon, Slovenia, Dubai, Bangkok, and of course, most recently, Barcelona. He has helped to shape the direction of AMEC for the last 2+ years as a member of its International Board of Directors, including chairing its Global Young Leaders Group, dedicated to connecting and mentoring young talent in the measurement and evaluation industry. Ben is also part of the PRCA's Research Best Practice Committee, which is dedicated to educating the PR industry on when and how to effectively use primary research. Hello, Ben.
Hello, everyone.
So you can follow this and other Cision webinars on Twitter with the hashtag Cision webinar. It would also be great to get your questions on the maturity mapper as we go on. Please use the question box, which you should see on the right-hand side of your screen, and we'll do our best to answer these later on. So Colin, Ben, and I are part of a working group developing AMEC's latest initiative, the Measurement Maturity Mapper, or to immature geeks like me, M-Cubed. The Maturity Mapper was launched as an initial pilot at the AMEC Global Summit on Measurement in Barcelona a couple of weeks ago. It's probably worth spending a couple of minutes on the summit itself. So the AMEC Global Summit is the world's largest international conference on communications measurement. This year was the summit's 10th anniversary and was the largest one yet, 330 delegates from more than 40 countries. There was an impressive and diverse range of speakers from Microsoft, Adobe, UNICEF, NATO, and the UK government. And the theme was centered around the 3 I's: innovation, integration, and insight. It's clear that the demand for insight is growing. According to the annual AMEC Business Insight Survey, which was published at the summit, 81% of members think that media measurement, research and intelligence has expanded in the last year, while 84% expect industry growth to continue in the next 12 months. That demand is leading to increased integration, both integration geographically, as organizations look to integrate separate regional activity into global communications programs, but also integration across data sets, from mainstream and digital media analysis to influencer analysis, audience research, website analytics, and sales data, as well as integration across marketing channels as organizations optimize communications across paid, owned, shared, and owned channels. And this is forcing the industry to innovate, using new technologies and developing best practices to move measurement beyond counting coverage to measuring impact against organizations' strategic objectives. And this increasing demand for insights and increasing integration is driving innovation. And this all suggests that the industry is moving forward and is maturing, which leads us nicely onto the Measurement Maturity Mapper. So together with Asim Sood from Impact Media in India, we presented the Measurement Maturity Mapper on the workshop on the final day, which was Thursday. And actually, as a brief aside, a personal highlight of the conference for me was Linda Salko-Rauter from Finland, who drew a sketch of every presentation and workshop live, starting from a blank screen and having not seen any of the material in advance. The ability to take in a huge amount of content and synthesize this into simple, niche graphical concepts in such a short time frame was incredible. All of Linda's sketch notes are available on the summit website, which is amecglobalsummit.org. This is Linda's sketch for the Maturity Mapper workshop. And this is a good opportunity to bring in Colin, who led our AMEC working group on the initiative. Colin, it'd be good if you could explain the idea behind the Maturity Mapper. What is it? Why do we need it?
So, first of all, I should probably say that it is a tool, and it is a tool, not a model. So the reason why people in the room here are smiling is because I managed to refer to it as a maturity model about 18 times in the course of the presentation, and then had to correct myself to reference it to a tool. But it's a tool. So as a tool, it's designed to serve a specific purpose. And the purpose is, how do you know if your program is good or bad? Are you tracking your progress against goals effectively? Maybe you are, maybe you're not. Maybe you're not, but your rivals aren't either, your competition isn't, so it doesn't matter too much. But how can you tell? Well, that's where the M3 mapper comes in. It's a combination of a benchmarking tool and, most importantly, a tool which gives you the opportunity to identify the things that you can do next, how you can improve your program to make it more effective at tracking your progress. It's a tool that's based on the existing good work that AMEC have already got in place. So it bases itself on the same principles. It's integrated with the integrated evaluation framework. Those are still the same tools that you would use to make your program consistent, make sure you're measuring the outcomes and outtakes as well as the outputs. But this is a tool that will help you identify, well, what's the next step I can do? And I think a lot of clients I've spoken to over the years would say, well, yeah, I know I need to do something better, but I just don't know what to do next. Because if I try and do everything in one big step, it's going to be too big. My organization isn't quite ready to adjust to that. I'm not sure I can adjust to it. So this is a tool that enables you to identify what those next key points are. And I think it's important to reflect that we use data within our organizations all the time. Any commercial organization is going to be thinking about its sales and its profitability on a month-by-month basis. There'll be other metrics depending on what your organizational objectives are, and they may be related to distribution or volume of retail, volume of sales in particular regions or so forth, or on particular products. But whatever those are, all organizations are to a greater or lesser extent data-driven. And those organizations that are most effective are organizations that use the data to enable them to continue to grow and develop and progress and succeed even better against their objectives. So we looked at how you can assess the effectiveness of your campaign measurement program on two scales. Firstly, how well do you track the results of your of your activities so that you can change and update and refine your planning of a campaign activity? So how do you modify what you're doing, or how do you develop new campaigns that build on what you've already achieved? And then also thinking about, it's not just about your planning, but it's also what is the organizational result? So you're creating this activity, you're designed to try and change perceptions or change behavior. Have you done that? And has that been a benefit to your organization or not? We all know that measurement can be very, very simple and just basic counting. There's limited opportunity if all you're doing is counting to actually have any influence on your campaign activity moving forward, because it doesn't really give you any insight. So as you develop your reporting to make it more sophisticated, to give you more direction, you can build more effective campaigns. And you can also have campaigns which have more of an impact at the organizational level and against the high level organizational objectives. So that led us to this map, which goes from basic through to fully integrated on your reporting layer, which is how sophisticated is your reporting, how much insight can you get from your reporting. The planning layer, how do you use that reporting in terms of driving new activity or refining existing activity? And then the impact layer, how much impact does the activity that you're producing for your organization, how much impact does it have on the actual organizational objectives? I'll hand over to Ben now to talk a little bit about actually how that works in practice.
Thank you, Colin. So as we mentioned just a moment ago, in terms of the genesis, let's say, of the mapper and how it came together. We, as AMEC board members and as a working group, really felt strongly that creating this mapper to help people within the industry was a natural extension to the work that's already been done, and saw it as kind of the next step. So if we think about the Barcelona principles, which I'm sure everyone on the line is quite familiar with, those are the ethos that we live by as measurement professionals within the communications space, and how the rules, let's say, that we adhere to when we think about how do you go about doing best practice measurement and evaluation. A few years ago, we launched the evaluation framework, which was really to help you operationalize. So if you live and breathe the Barcelona principles, how can you start to put that into practice and start to plan measurement programs going forward? And so what the mapper does is that third kind of piece, which within that is then, as both Paul and Colin alluded to, allow you to do two things. One, benchmark where you are on your measurement journey from, as you see on the screen there, more towards the standard side of things, and how do you help progress yourself to the next step? So you may be an organization that is doing output measurement, let's say, but you want to know how to better integrate it with other parts within the communications function, and looking towards the future, perhaps, how do we then integrate it with what other parts of the business are doing? And we felt that this was the tool to help professionals do that. So to help benchmark where you are, as we said, and then provide as an output not just those benchmarks and where you sit on this map, which we'll talk about a bit more in just a moment, but what are the steps one should take? What is the advice that we can provide, that the tool can help provide to move us on to the next stage? So when we think about going on that journey, what we've done here is just try to map out the various metrics that one may see within their reporting at each stage as we move from that on the lower left-hand side of the map, if we're looking at just counting the outputs, and moving through that kind of that foundational layer of reporting to being more focused on outtakes, reporting on outcomes, and then eventually reporting business impacts back to the business. The next layer then, which helps move you along within that journey, is really thinking about from that planning layer, what are some of the things that one needs to be doing when we move along the mapper. So it's everything from setting smart objectives through to doing doing formative research to understand your audience, have a plan in place for evaluation, all the way through to strategic planning. And then where we really want to be moving ourselves to is then demonstrating to our organizations and the clients that we work with, how do we take communications evaluation across the PASO spectrum and ensure that that gets integrated into how the rest of the organization is measuring and evaluating success from a MarCom's perspective. So this is just meant to kind of illustrate how one might move from one stage to the next and what you may expect in terms of what you would be doing as an organization based on the diagnostic, which we're going to talk about a little more in just a moment. So this, again, as you can see, it's all about moving to the next step as an output from the tool. So when we talk about the questionnaire itself and how we came about pulling this all together, we developed a set of questions, a self-diagnostic questionnaire that mapped back to each one of those stages that we talked about, to each one of the layers that we discussed. So the foundational reporting layer, the planning layer, and then again, how does that integrate back into the business organizations that you work for. It's a self-completion online tool, and we were very pleased to have a set of guinea pigs, so to speak, or a pilot launch earlier this year where several organizations took part in the survey so that we can actually have real data to work with, so we could not just talk about this tool in theory, we could see it work in practice. And now we're going to show you some of what those outputs look like, so you know what it looks like on the journey, and then what some of that advice look like to move you along that journey. So I'll hand it over to Paul.
Thanks, Ben. So as Ben said, we've had an initial test of the questionnaire, and that's actually helped us to start building out our data set. So we sent out the invitation to answer the question out for our various client networks, and it's probably worth giving a big shout out to Matt Reynolds, Managing Director of Vitreous World, who helped distribute the questionnaire to PRCA members. So I think in total we sent out 9,000 invitations, of which we got 500 people clicking through to the questionnaire link. The emphasis was very much on end users, so both in-house and agencies rather than measurement companies. And we ended up with 62 completed questionnaires. So there's a couple of caveats on interpreting this data. I think the first point is, at the moment, this is still a relatively small sample size. And the second point is that it's probably not likely to be completely representative. And that's because people who are more likely to be interested in measurement and are therefore likely to be more sophisticated are more likely to have taken time to complete the questionnaire. So there is need to take some care, but I think there's still some useful information here. Overall, though, there's a good balance between in-house corporates, not-for-profits, government and agencies. There's roughly a third of each of those. Good representation from different sizes of companies, just over half, more than 250 employees, just under a half, less than 250 employees. Most of the respondents based in the UK and Western Europe, with 68% having a national focus, while 32% an international focus. So over time, we want to broaden this data set out, have respondents from different markets to understand and reflect the different levels of maturity. And also by building out the data set, we'll be able to drill down further into types of sector, types of agency, government versus charity, etc. And we'll be able to do more complicated cross-tabulation, such as if you're a small corporate versus a larger corporate. So what we can do with all of this data is we can aggregate the data together by combining the answers to each of the questionnaires on the questionnaire. We can effectively create a percentage score out of 100 against each of the three dimensions that Ben mentioned earlier on, the dimensions of reporting, planning, and organizational impact. And we can then create an overall total. And when we can do this, we can establish an average for the whole data set. This would put the average for reporting and planning at 58%. Putting them in the third box, advanced, while the average for business impact is less than 49%, and the whole lot averages out as around 54%. The lines on the charts in front of you show the distribution of the answers. So for reporting and planning, more than half of respondents fell into that third box. And it's probably worth repeating that caveat that the data set's likely to be skewed towards people with more of an enthusiasm for measurement because they've taken time to answer the questionnaire. For business impact, it's slightly less, more evenly distributed across the second and third boxes. So we can then split that data further, look and see if there's differences between different types of organizations, between commercial organizations, government organizations, not-for-profits, agencies. And when we can see this, the three are very close for the reporting dimension, whereas agencies score more than average, more on average than commercial organizations, which score more than charities for both planning and for business impact. And there was some debate at the summit on why agencies are scoring better on planning and impact. And the first question is there some cheating going on? Which actually, since it's a self-completing questionnaire, is actually quite valid. Are agencies overstating themselves? Or are we only seeing the results of those agencies who have taken the effort to fill in the questionnaire and therefore taking the measurement more seriously? And actually, there was a third point, which we got some feedback when we were doing this. Some agencies had suggested there was a bit of a confusion around the interpretation of the more strategic impact-orientated questions. Did these relate to the agency as a whole or for more specific client work? And that's been really useful feedback because we can take that on board when we're doing the next iteration of the questionnaire. So for the overall data set, we can get a good picture of current strengths and weaknesses in general. So on the plus side, well, the good thing is the vast majority of people are regularly evaluating their activity. And 69% are measuring quality as well as quantity. So they're not just counting clips and impressions that Colin mentioned earlier on. There seems to be regular measurement of audience engagement on both owned and social channels, and a good, healthy proportion, 71%, use evaluation to provide insights to feed into planning. 2/3 use evaluation to track performance relative to the organization's communications goals, although, and I think this is an important point, as we'll see, this is not always then linked to the organization's strategic objectives. And most say that comms evaluation contributes to the overall reporting of the overall organization performance. But on the negative side, well, some respondents continue to use AVEs. Now, at the summit itself, there was the Business Insight survey, which I mentioned earlier on, which was published at the summit, that showed that AVEs have declined significantly in recent years. and in the last year in particular, in response to AMEC and the PRCA's Say No to ABEs campaign. This data suggests that while progress has been made, there's still some more to do. A significant proportion of respondents say that comms evaluation is not as robust as other parts of the organisation, and there appears to be a lack of regular quantitative and qualitative audience research, with just 26% and 15% of respondents regularly conducting this type of research respectively. 37% regularly link PR performance to reputation and impact on strategic and organisational objectives, which is a lot lower than those tracking performance relative to the communications goals. 39% regularly integrate measurement across paid, earned, shared and owned, while just 19% contribute PR data to market mix analysis in order to understand the contribution of the different marketing channels. And I think these data points suggest that there's a challenge with demonstrable linkages to audience outcomes across different marketing channels, and then in turn understanding the overall business impact in an integrated way. So now we have started to build a data set, we can use this as a benchmark against which we can measure ourselves, as Ben explained earlier on. And to illustrate this, this is actually a specific example from one of the respondents. This is Slimming World. So Jenny Caven's the head of external affairs, and she gave the final keynote speech on the Wednesday afternoon. And she was kind enough after the speech, I was talking to her afterwards, and she said, yes, actually, feel free, you can use the questionnaire and you can show how this actually works and see if it links with my presentation. And luckily, it did align quite well, which is good news. Few, yes. The blue dots represent Jenny's answers. So they're the Slimming World score, and that's compared to the grey, which is the average. And this is currently the overall average, but obviously with a bigger data set, we could focus this down on similar organisations within the sector or indeed region. So Slimming World comes out better than average in each dimension as well as overall. They do well both in reporting and planning, with business impact being further behind, and that reflects the overall trend we've been seeing so far. The percentile figure, which you can see on the right, allows you to see how you compare against the overall range of the data set as well as the average. So in this case, the 72nd percentile means that Slimming World scored better than 72% of the responses. And as well as giving these overall scores, we can then use how the questions have been answered to help provide help and advice on what you do well and where you could improve. So on the positive side for Slimming World, well, they measure quality as well as quantity. They track exposure to target audiences, use quantitative research to understand audience awareness and knowledge, and then track business outcomes on their owned media channels, such as their website. They use data tactically to understand how to better target audiences and what messaging resonates with these audiences. And in turn, Jenny can then set the team KPI benchmarks that they can measure their performance against and to track positive trends over time. And then at the business level, Slimming World integrate multiple data sets from both mainstream and social media analysis, audience tracking data, and website analytics to demonstrate how PR activity increases awareness, improves reputation, and ultimately drives people to the Slimming World website to join as new members. Measurement is therefore used to show how communications support the journey of the customer, contributing to the core business goals. Feedback from the measurement is then used to adjust strategy over time, leading to a virtuous cycle of continuous improvement. But the maturity mapper has also highlighted a few areas of improvement for the measurement itself. And there's kind of three main areas. First, Slimming World could benefit from more qualitative audience research, such as the use of focus groups, in addition to the more quantitative tracking studies. Secondly, it would be beneficial for the organisation to benchmark itself against key competitors. And the good news is that's something the team are now implementing. And finally, and most importantly, and this really links into some of the findings we've been seeing so far, although there's some integration of data sets, particularly across earned and owned channels, there could be more integration across the whole PACE-O mix to get a more holistic picture of how consumer behaviour is affected and to further optimise communications across those marketing channels. I think it's fair to say Jenny and Slimming World have come a long way. As she admitted in her talk, she had been an evaluation skeptic who was mainly using basic counting, including using ABEs. But by using best practice from Barcelona principles and the integrated evaluation framework that Ben mentioned, she has developed Slimming World's measurement program over the last few years and has moved significantly along the maturity journey. And this has been recognized for its success in the AMEC Awards. Slimming World have won 5 AMEC Awards in the last 2 years, including golds for best use of a measurement framework, best use of integrated communication measurement and research, and best measurement of a consumer campaign. So overall then, the maturity mapper helps you to navigate that journey, showing where you currently are and where you can go to next in order to improve communications effectiveness and drive greater impact. So it's now, we were thinking now start bringing some questions in from the audience. And while we're looking at seeing what's coming in, I've got a couple of questions myself. And Ben, if I can bring you here, I mentioned that sort of difference between the agencies and corporates and consumers. So I guess there's a couple of questions to feed off that. I guess the first one is, if from your experience within an agency, how do you see agencies using the maturity mapper and how they can then use it in turn with their clients?
I think the first way the mapper can be used within an agency context is as a conversation starter. So, I mean, it does a couple things for someone in my position, which is really beneficial. So the questionnaire itself was designed to have a lot of the questions that we as consultants within the agency normally would ask of a client. So oftentimes you bring on a new client, one of the first things that you suggest doing is having that kind of measurement and goal setting session. So trying to figure out what they have in place, where are the gaps, where do they want to get to. Having a tool like this, it takes a lot of that. It in a very succinct way can get you a lot of that information. So I think the first thing is that it allows you to have a simpler, more straightforward, and more informed conversation with your client. And you can get right down from the very beginning what it is, where your client sits from a measurement perspective, and then start to have a very substantive conversation about where they want to get to. So it's a great conversation starter. It's a great ability to consult right from the beginning of a relationship with a client. And then even with existing clients, it's an opportunity to have to re-engage with them, so to speak, to have conversation. You know, perhaps you've had a measurement program in place and you've been trying to move them along. Well, as the tool, as we said, it sets benchmarks. It allows you to give a sense of where you as an organization sit, and nothing motivates individuals as a league table, so to speak. Mm-hmm. So if I'm here and I know my competition is a bit further along, well, I might be a bit more motivated to do things better. So it can provide that for you as well.
So speaking of the kind of league table and that sort of sense of how do I compare, back to my kind of suggestion earlier on, do we think agencies are cheating here, or certain people are cheating? Do you think there's, or not necessarily cheating, but is there a sense, do we think people could exaggerate given that it's self-serving or self-completion questionnaire?
I'll answer quickly and I'll hand it to Colin. I think in agency, we do have a tendency to exaggerate at times, let's say, to be overly optimistic, even in a situation where, in a pilot case like this, where we don't know necessarily who answered the questionnaire and that it is anonymous. I think there is that sense when you're in an agency world of not wanting to be behind the curve. So there might be a little bit of optimism when taking it, but I think over time what we'll find is that I think we'll start to know what good is and where, regardless of what organization you're from, where you sit on the model or on the map.
And I suppose from the perspective of, if you're using this as a tool to provide you with clear recommendations for what to do next, there's a certain amount of honesty that you need to build into the way you respond to it. Because if you make up an exaggerated view of where you are on the map by the way that you respond to the diagnostic questionnaire, then you're not really going to get a very credible output. And that isn't going to be the fault of the tool. It's going to be the fault of the person who's completed the questionnaire. And I mean, to what you were talking about before, Ben, I mean, Asim was so excited. So he was also on our panel at Barcelona. And he just came to it from the ability to have, as Ben says, really interesting conversations with clients, taking them out of the day-to-day, the transactional, this deliverable or that deliverable, and actually sitting down with the client and filling the questionnaire next to the client. You're not going to do that and make up bogus responses to the questions, because A, you'll look foolish, and B, you're looking foolish in front of your client, and that's not going to help your credibility.
Not in your benefit either.
And actually, by being honest and open, you'll get better results. There will be some overclaim, but across a large body of responses as we build up the database and collect more and more data, I think it will bottom out, and we'll end up with as you say, Ben, we'll get that better sense of what good looks like and what the real average is, because you'll screen out some of the outliers that are clearly fictional, for want of saying something more antagonistic. That's true of every type of questionnaire. Most questionnaires that people complete nowadays are online and they're self-administered. So there's always a certain amount of bias that comes inherent with that. And actually, culturally, it can be very different from country to country. This will work through because we're talking about, primarily we're talking about a business-to-business audience, and it's done in collaboration. I think we will be working with organizations and we'll have people participating that genuinely want to get a benefit. It's important also to say, you're not going to be able to identify who is in your comparison set. So we won't be showing an aggregated response unless it's sufficiently large enough number of organizations to be unidentifiable within the set. So you'll see your results and you'll see the average of whatever your comparison point is. And that's important because, yes, there will be organizations that won't want to submit their data if they feel they're going to be revealed. So we need to make sure that that's clear and that's well communicated, because otherwise we won't get valid responses as part of our data.
Yeah, that's a good point. A couple of questions come in with kind of a similar theme, or certainly I think a theme in terms of how you might want to approach it. First one, I'm interested to see how you use this working for certain organizations where the recommendations are validly dismissed. In some cases, with a complex corporate brand, website or customer sign-up is not the overall goal. Mm-hmm. So, for example, opinion research is the gold measure for an improvement in reputation. So I think this kind of speaks to the impact. Also, there are different communications can do different things in different types of organizations. Mm-hmm. Yeah. They have different goals. So how would the maturity mapper and I guess also the integrated evaluation framework that it's based on mm-hmm. then work in those types of situations where you have different goals?
I mean, almost a couple of times during the conference, people talked about, well, what metric replaces AVEs? And this is not a new argument. It comes around again and again. People are looking for one measure of organizational success in terms of the communications, which will work against every single objective. There is no such thing. It's shibboleth. It doesn't exist. It's a myth. It's a unicorn. What does exist is organizations have objectives. If the organizations are smart, they have smart objectives, which are measurable, which you know if you've achieved them. And then that's what you set into the integrated evaluation framework. Have I achieved my success against my objectives because I know what they are? And for some organizations, they will be helping people in deprived situations in parts of the world where there's significant challenges. Another organization might be, we've become the #1 market leader in our sector. For another organization, it will be something completely different. All organizations are, to a greater or less extent, unique within themselves. But providing you've got clarity about your objectives, then you can set measures against whether you've achieved those objectives. And the mapper itself will tell you how sophisticated your tracking of success against those objectives is in terms of how well your communications is supporting those objectives. It's not going to tell you what the magic number is, because the magic number doesn't exist. And if you spend too much time running down that rabbit hole, you'll suddenly wake up one day and find that the world has just moved on around you and you've not achieved anything that you need to.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point, isn't it? Because the whole point about the maturity mapper and the integrated evaluation framework, and indeed the Barcelona principles, is they're designed to be general.
They're flexible.
They're flexible, and they can be applied to different types of organizations and different types of objectives. I think the challenge is, I guess, when you then illustrate it, as I did with the Slimming World example, mm-hmm. you then think about it in that case from, I guess, a consumer driving membership point of view. Yeah. Because there's another question coming in here about how do you replace AVE, which is what you just mm-hmm. talked about, but in relation to B2B rather than B2C, mm-hmm. Which I guess is a similar, similar point.
I'm guessing a lot of people who are on the call, especially if you're an agency side, if an agency, your business is B2B, you don't have consumers knocking on your door. So B2B your success is pretty much measured by perceptions of your audience, your client base, and how much revenue you're generating. And those are going to be important metrics for your organization. Your communications will help drive perceptions of your audience. If you find that your audience doesn't have any particular view or has almost a view of, well, that's not really something they do, and you think that particular area of activity is something that's core for your agency, then you've got a problem. And that's a communications problem, and you should be looking for communication solutions.
And Ben, what's your kind of view about this? You know, is B2B different from B2C, or actually can you have these general principles that apply to both?
I think they apply to both, and that's, as you said, Paul, it was all designed to be flexible. And I think the important point, and I don't want it to be lost within the discussion, is that what the mapper is meant to help you do, in addition to saying this is where I sit within my, if I'm thinking about how sophisticated my measurement and evaluation is, and this is how I compare within my industry, what we should be, how else it should be applied is to really think about, as Colin said, if we have set goals and objectives, and we are very clear about what communications is meant to achieve, having this diagnostic tool then help to see how do you measure up to how does your measurement and evaluation program measure up to being able to report back on those objectives. So you should be able to see, and will be able to see very clearly, if I'm focused on demonstrating impact on perceptions or reputation, but according to my diagnostic, I'm more on the left-hand side of the spectrum and I'm not focused on those things, then I have very, very actionable steps to take to improve the program. And that's the mapper, is really, I mean, at the end of the day, it is about benchmarking and advice, but it is about, if you're thinking about it in a very practical sense, how do I make things better? It's identifying that gap, let's say, between what it is you know that you're focused on, be it B2B, B2C, what have you, what communication is meant to do for the organization, how are you currently measuring that now, and is that aligned? And if it's not, here's what you do to make it better.
Yeah, and I mean, it's fair to say that when the three of us first started talking about this, it was all about getting practical, pragmatic steps to improve. And not just to improve for the sake of improving, but improving because measuring your communications more effectively enables you to create more effective campaigns, and that enables you to be contributing to the success of your organization more effectively. And ultimately makes you look smarter, makes your organization look smarter, helps your organization achieve their goals. I mean, that's ultimately it.
It's an interesting question about frequency of how often you do this kind of stuff. I guess from my experience, it can vary depending on what it is you're measuring. So focus groups often is not done as frequently as, say, regular audience tracking research.
No, and I think you've probably got different metrics depending on how your organization is using the feedback that you're gathering. And it may not make sense to go to a focus group audience more frequently than every month, because actually you're trying to track perception shifts amongst that audience. They're not likely to shift that quickly. So you assess the perceptions of your audience through whatever tools you're using, and if you're using focus groups as part of your qualitative data collection, fantastic. I think focus groups are amazing tools for generating real deep understanding and insight. You then develop your activity and you launch your activity, you put your activity in marketplace, and then you come back and get the audience views on it after the activity has had the opportunity to land and have an effect. And if you're not seeing it through any other way, then you check to see the perceptions, which could be through quantitative surveys or qualitative surveys, but certainly you'd expect to have some sort of qualitative measure. So the frequency is really going to depend on what's right for your organization. I guess if you're a very, very large FMCG, you're talking about high volumes of sales, maybe more frequently would work for you. I've certainly seen a very large brand used to do weekly, very small scale bits of qualitative research where they could have a small focus group of 4 to 5 people, 2 or 3 of those across an evening, and they would do that every month. Was it telling them something that they didn't know? Well, what they were doing was they were very much focused on issues which were coming up and relevant for their business, and that's how they used it.
Isn't also one of the challenges here, I guess, question to you, Ben, that actually a lot of this data already exists. That clients across their enterprise, across their organisation, are doing tracking studies, or they do have access to website analytics. It's just you don't always combine it all together. Have access to combine it all together. So actually, a big chunk of this is then working across the organisation, which I guess is that impact layer.
Right, and even I think there's a question there about how do all these metrics come together, and what does that reporting system look like? And in my experience, the answer is that it can depend, and it varies, and it depends on the organization, because as Paul just alluded to, that a lot of times the data that you need to have truly integrated reporting and looking at, say, a single campaign or ongoing activity requires coordination and access to other parts of the client organization or within your own organization. So speaking to the marketing guys, speaking to people who are in charge of paid digital, what have you. And I think that, as Colin was saying, the frequency of reporting will certainly vary by the organization that we're talking about. And I think what that's alluding to is then, what is the role that marketing communications more broadly has in terms of influencing outcomes and behavior with an audience? And I think we should let that guide us to a certain extent about how frequently we need to be collecting the data, because if it is the life cycle, or say the journey of a decision or a change in behavior being made is quite short, then you probably want to be getting feedback quickly so that you can ensure that the communication and the work you're doing is reaching that audience and having the desired impact you want. If it takes a bit more time, you probably have that kind of reporting more infrequently. So the integration piece continues to be somewhat of a challenge. I know the clients we work with, they're aware of it and they're trying to solve it. I believe there's some, quite large clients that we work with who are putting a lot of time and effort into having integrated reporting in place. So I think hopefully what the mapper can do for those of us in the communication space is provide us with just even a bit more, let's say, credibility and information and knowledge about how we can go about ensuring that we're a part of that integration with our clients.
Just to sort of come into on that one a little bit, working within a client organization, I had that challenge where I was working in the customer and commercial insight team. We had challenges getting access to some of that data for a while. And what we did over time was built up relationships internally, and very difficult for an agency to do this. You need to have an internal champion who's prepared to put the effort in, but actually going to those owners of those bits of data, talking to them and getting a shared value. So, okay, well, if you give me this data, I can do this analysis. What analysis on that data can I provide you, or combining this data? But those stories that happen in individual sort of events, unfortunately, it's now not yet as common as widespread as it ought to be and could be. But it is, when we talk about being fully integrated, that is part of what I think we're trying to achieve and trying to recommend to people to focus on. Because if the whole organisation is fully integrated, sharing all of its data, there's an honesty, a transparency, and there's an effectiveness there, because there's no quibble, there's no question about where issues have come up. You can then focus at an organisational level things that need to be improved.
Yeah, there's a few of these questions are talking about kind of next steps. So how do I get involved? Is there going to be a website? Is this going to be a tool?
Sure.
Do I have to pay for it? Probably worth.
So that's probably fair for me to chip in on this. The next steps, we have, using our pilot data, we're in the process of updating our diagnostic questionnaire to simplify and refine it. And the reason that it's not generally available and launched yet is because we recognize that what we provided, and our willing, thank you so much on my part, our people who've helped us pilot this questionnaire, they went through quite a lot of effort because it's long and needs refinement. So we're working on refining that questionnaire. We're then going to be launching the tool. It will be available on the AMEC website alongside the integrated evaluation framework. It is a tool that is designed to be used by anybody who works in the communication profession or the evaluation of communications profession. It will be free to access. In terms of some of the questions that are up there, for examples of case studies or larger organisations that are using that, yes, that's something that we'll be looking to develop with organisations to build and support different examples of using the tool. We've got Measurement Month, which is another AMEC initiative, which is a series of webinars, in-person seminars, and general events that happen throughout the month of November at a global level. The tool will be ready and will be available to anybody to use by November. We'll be keeping people posted via the AMEC website on exactly where we are at each stage and as we develop the overall tool. The platform will work by, you will go to the platform, you'll complete the questionnaire, you'll then see your report in terms of how your results show where you are, and also how you benchmark against different organisations. And then also you'll see the report in the format that Paul showed with what are the strengths and what the areas for development. Just to really sort of make it clear. And in terms of folks highlighting they're really willing to help and contribute, we will be having another round of testing once we've got the updated questionnaire ready and the platform built, and we'll be sure to make a note of your name so that we can get out and get in touch with you and ask you just to do some work with us just to test this out. I think it's a fantastic tool. I think there's massive opportunities to use this as an engagement tool with clients, but it's also a practical tool because it's going to help agencies and client organizations to really take a step change and lift their game in terms of what they're doing in terms of evaluation.
Thanks, Colin. And I absolutely agree with that. I think it just allows us to have that proper, honest conversation with our clients, with communications teams, to diagnose where we are, understand where we need to go in the future. And that's got to be good. Just as a final act, I'd like to give a big thanks to, it wasn't just Colin, Ben and me, and we've already mentioned a theme, but there's a broader group to help with the maturity mapper, not least, as Colin mentioned, everyone that spent time filling in the questionnaire. We really appreciate it. I mentioned a theme from Impact Research in India. Also mentioned Matt Reynolds from Vitreous World, but also the PRTA email marketing team, Professor Jim McNamara from the University of Technology in Sydney, for all of the advice on the questionnaire and how the mapper would work itself. That was invaluable. The support of Richard and Barry at AMEC and Ali G at Fleischmann Hillard Fishman. And in particular, I'd like to thank Ben and Colin for joining me, both for your hard work, clear thinking and strong leadership on developing the measurement maturity mapper itself, but also for joining me today and to share the journey so far. So thank you, Ben. Thank you, Colin.
Thank you to our audience.
Thank you everyone for joining.
And it's a goodbye from me.